Hello, this is Ken Ferry with this week's Boots in the Field. Some are done with corn and started beans. Others are kind of like we are with the plots, probably in that 80% range. We need one more push to finish up the corn and then get started on the beans. For the most part, corn stands that we've been looking at are looking pretty good. Looks like we got some pretty good emergence out there. Now is the time, though, to be doing those stand counts, stretching those tapes, and going out there and checking for emergence, checking for uniformity, how well did it emerge, dig up those missing plants, that are missing out there and try to figure out why they're missing. Is it actual skip from the corn planter, or is there something wrong with the corn seed? It's going to be hard to identify what those skips are a month from now. So we need to be out there, and this is the kind of scouting, again, we do in the field. You're not going to be able to do it from the pickup window itself. With all the good stands that I've seen, though, we probably have more troubled stands than I've seen in a while, and I think that's something that we need to be addressing as well. If I'm going to say where are the biggest problems with stand establishment right now, it happens to be in the corn that was planted in the dry soils. The dry soils are creating some uneven emergence issues. Some of these are bad enough that you can see them from the road, that you see missing rows and parts of the row, that type of thing out there itself. And we had too much dry soil out there as we were planting itself. Now, again, most fields, you're going to have to go out in the field and actually see what's going on and identify where that stand loss has been. We are seeing more seed chilling than I initially thought we would, and that seed chilling, of course, is the disoriented seeds that kind of corkscrew in the ground and want to leaf out under the ground itself. And this seed chilling is basically showing up in the corn that was planted before April 16th, and of course that also matches up with our weather records as far as where soil temperatures were. So seed chilling, if we remember, can happen below 50 degrees. It gets more aggressive below 45 degrees. And that's those cold nights and the planting windows are what's triggering it. So the corn planted after the 17th, we're not seeing seed chilling issues, seeing a little bit better emergence from that standpoint itself. But some of those that leaf out underground or take their while to get to the surface, they're going to be barren plants. So even though they show up, if they show up a week later, they're not of much value. The other thing that we're getting a number of calls on is starter burn. Starter burn is higher than typical, and again, it is in the dry soils where we're concerned about moisture at planting. And is it possible to have starter burn and seed chilling in the same field? You better believe it. We're seeing that in a number of fields as well. The main thing, though, is we need to assess those stands really close now, because we have the opportunity to redo this without much yield loss. 4 out of the last 5 years, our best corn was planted here in this time frame in May. So we don't want to go out there in June and wish that we'd replant it. So don't let this window slip away from me. Evaluate those stands pretty close, and if we got to make some replant decisions, let's make it. Again, when you're looking at those replant decisions and you're trying to estimate your ear count, put some consideration in how much flex your hybrid actually has. Can it make up for some of those low numbers out there in the field itself? But now is the time to bring our A game in scouting. Again, this is something we can't do from the pickup. If you're in a little bit of a rain delay, let's get out there, start doing those stand counts. Don't forget to record them, write them down so you can look at them and you can compare them from year to year in itself. Also started to get some reports in on the cutworm this week. The cutworm feeding actually started last week as the reports come in, but we're still getting reports coming in here. This morning's report, we had one grower that had cutworm feeding in a field that had insecticide on it. It's been fairly quiet, though. And I said, well, maybe they're not going to be an issue. Remember, though, the big push or the big flights that we saw were projected. We thought maybe somewhere in the 7th to the 9th we'd start seeing the feeding of the big push. With this cool weather, that's probably pushed back more in the 10th to 12th. So somewhere in the middle of next week is when the aggressive feeding from the first big flights that were recorded are going to show up. Because we had so many nights with strong flights throughout a 2-week period, there's going to be some prolonged heavy feeding here. Basically, we're going to have the corn outgrow the feeding or the insect to be killed by whatever insecticide that you have in the field itself. So now's the time to start to watch those areas. Again, we're talking about no-till being high risk, chickweed, henbit areas that were had vegetation growing on it back there in the 20th of March time frame itself. And you're typically going to be looking for about 3% of the plants being cut, being the threshold of when we would pull the trigger. Armyworm, again, the armyworm traps that we've had out have mainly been by wheat fields. We're now at 70 heat units from our largest armyworm flight. We need to get to about 600. So it's going to be a little bit before the armyworm shows up there in the wheat. We're probably about 2.5, 3 weeks out, maybe even longer. Some questions coming in as I'm getting ready to put my flag leaf fungicide on. As these flag leaves are coming out, can I throw a preventive action at that and try to take out the armyworm if I've had armyworm in my traps next to my wheat field? There really is no preventive maintenance that we can do for the armyworm itself. So a situation where we have to kind of wait for it to show up. So it's not going to match up with the timing on flag leaf protection. If you are going to be spraying for head scab later, it might. So situation before you do any head scab spraying, you really do want to look for the larvae and see if they're out there itself. On the soybean front, again, we want to watch the soybeans that are planted with this rain and cold weather to make sure that they're going to get up out of the ground. In some areas where you guys receive some pretty hard driving rains, you may need to help them up, especially with this dip in cold temperatures itself, as far as making sure they don't get in trouble and get out there and hoe it before the crust would actually develop. You know, as the saying goes, hoe before you know. Don't let the ground get hard and crusted over before you're trying to help those soybeans up itself. Especially in those fields that seem to be on the struggle bus when it comes to stand emergence. They run together quick on you and that type of thing. And the same way with this last planted corn, if the corn's not up yet and you did receive one of those 1.5-inch rains in 45 minutes, be watching those stands, and we get back up in the 80-degree temperatures here at the end of the week. You don't want a crust to develop and not be able to get that corn out of the ground itself. But for the most part, I think we're off to a pretty good start. We got some good staggering in our planting windows. That's going to help us out in July when we're doing this pollination and trying to do all that scouting, and some pretty good stands. I think we just need to make sure that, you know, we don't get caught sleeping at the wheel here and take our eyes off of what potentially could be a replant issue if we need it in some of these fields itself. So from that, keep it safe, keep her moving, and we'll talk to you next week.